There is a moment in every generation when someone walks onto a stage, and the entire audience realizes they are looking at something they were absolutely not prepared to see. Sometimes it is a hip thrust that rewrites the rules of television. Sometimes it is a pair of split trousers that ends a career overnight. And sometimes it is a grown man in a yellow lace bodysuit with his entire backside exposed on national television, and the camera operators are trying to figure out how much of this they are legally allowed to broadcast. From the waist-up censorship of the 1950s to the anything-goes chaos of early MTV, these are 15 pop stars who showed too much on stage. Number 15. Elvis Presley. It is almost impossible to explain to anyone born after 1970 just how scandalous Elvis Presley's hips were in 1956. The man was fully clothed. He was wearing a suit. He was singing a song about a dog. And America lost its collective mind. It started on the Milton Berle Show in June of 1956, when Elvis performed Hound Dog and slowed the final chorus down to a grinding, thrusting blues tempo that sent the studio audience into hysterics. The next morning, critics called it a display of primitive physical movement that was difficult to describe in a family newspaper. A judge in Jacksonville, Florida, literally threatened Elvis with arrest if he moved below the waist during an upcoming concert. Elvis stood almost perfectly still for the entire show and wiggled only his pinky finger. When Ed Sullivan finally booked him, the first two broadcasts showed Elvis head to toe. For the third appearance on January 6, 1957, the cameras were instructed to film him only from the waist up. 60 million people watched at home, and every single one of them knew what was happening below the frame because the studio audience would not stop screaming. The screams and the applause told the television viewers everything the censors were trying to hide, which almost made the whole exercise pointless. After the performance, Sullivan walked out and told the audience that Elvis was a real decent, fine boy, which is a fairly strange thing to say about someone you had just spent an entire broadcast trying to censor from the ribcage down. But the damage was done, and by damage we mean Elvis Presley became the biggest entertainment figure on the planet. Number 14. PJ Proby. If you have never heard of PJ Proby, there is a very specific reason, and that reason involves a pair of velvet trousers. Born James Marcus Smith in Houston, Texas, Proby was one of the biggest male pop stars in Britain by early 1965. He had been introduced by Paul McCartney on the Beatles' first UK television special, and was co-hosting a national tour with Cilla Black. He had 12 custom-made velvet suits with skin-tight bell-bottoms. Then on January 29th, at the ABC Theater in Croydon, he attempted a knee slide, and his trousers ripped from knee to crotch. 2 days later, at the Ritz Cinema in Luton, it happened again. He was kicked off the tour and replaced by a young Welsh singer named Tom Jones. Within a week, Proby was banned from every major theater chain in Britain, plus the BBC and ITV. The Daily Mirror called him a morally insane degenerate. Tom Jones, his replacement, became one of the biggest entertainers in the world. One pair of trousers, that is all it took. Number 13. Mick Jagger. If Elvis cracked the door open on sexually charged stage performance, Mick Jagger kicked it off its hinges. From the moment the Rolling Stones started performing in London clubs in 1962, Jagger's stage presence was unlike anything audiences had seen. Even Elvis at his most scandalous had not exerted what one biographer called a power so wholly and disturbingly physical. Elvis made girls scream. Jagger made men uncomfortable. By the mid-60s, Jagger was strutting across stages in skin-tight trousers and unbuttoned shirts, with movements that combined ballet, burlesque, and something nobody had a name for yet. In 1967, photographer Cecil Beaton captured a photograph of Jagger's naked backside that sold at auction 20 years later for $4,000. As the 70s arrived, Jagger leaned even harder in. The codpiece era, the sheer tops, the strutting. Every parents' group in the Western world spent 2 decades trying to figure out what to do about it. The answer was nothing. Number 12. Jim Morrison. On March 1st, 1969, The Doors performed at the Dinner Key Auditorium in Miami for roughly 12,000 people, crammed into a former seaplane hangar with no air conditioning. Morrison arrived late and drunk. He had recently seen the Living Theater, an experimental group known for breaking down the wall between performers and audiences. And he decided that tonight he was going to try his own version of that approach on a crowd that had paid to hear Light My Fire. What happened next depends entirely on who you ask. The Miami Herald reported Morrison exposed himself and simulated sexual acts on stage. Keyboardist Ray Manzarek, standing right next to him, said none of it happened. Manzarek called it a mass hallucination, saying Morrison told the crowd he was going to do it, and they simply believed they saw it. Guitarist Robbie Krieger backed that story up for decades, pointing out that 500 photographs were taken at that concert, and not a single one showed Morrison exposing himself. 6 arrest warrants were issued anyway. The charges included a felony count of lewd and lascivious behavior, indecent exposure, open profanity, and public drunkenness. The mayor of Jacksonville personally canceled a Doors concert in his city the following week. Venues across the country started dropping the band from their schedules. Morrison was convicted of misdemeanor indecent exposure, sentenced to 6 months in prison, and fled to Paris before serving the sentence. He died there in July of 1971 at age 27. 41 years later, Florida arranged a posthumous pardon, officially admitting there had not been enough evidence. Number 11, Tina Turner. Tina Turner did not just wear revealing costumes on stage. She essentially invented the template for what a female rock performer's stage wardrobe could look like. During the Ike and Tina Turner revue era, she moved away from the modest gowns that were standard for female performers, toward ultra-short mini dresses and daring slits that showcased her extraordinary physicality. Rolling Stone described her look as a very short miniskirt with zillions of silver sequins, and her dancing was described as completely unrestrained. This was the 1960s, when female performers were expected to stand behind a microphone. After leaving Ike in 1976 with nothing, she was living on food stamps with her children. Designer Bob Mackie stepped in and created the costumes that defined her comeback. The flame dress had strips of red, orange, and yellow sequins, and a cape made of turkey feathers. The winged costume used pleated silver lame fabric that floated behind her as she dashed across the stage. Mackie credited Tina with the idea of adding increasingly dramatic slits to every dress he made for her, and he told People magazine the slits were always Tina's idea. By the time Private Dancer made her one of the biggest stars on the planet in 1984, her barely there stage costumes were as much a part of her identity as her voice. She was 44 years old, wearing leather miniskirts and mesh stockings, and proving that age and a devastating personal history had absolutely nothing to do with owning a stage. Number 10, Iggy Pop. If everyone else on this list showed too much skin, Iggy Pop showed too much of everything: skin, blood, and occasionally peanut butter. Iggy formed the Stooges in 1967 and immediately began turning live performance into a contact sport. He was one of the first rock performers to go shirtless as a permanent style choice. It was not a one-off moment. It was not a mid-show reveal. He simply never wore a shirt on stage again for the rest of his career. By 1968, that evolved into nudity. By 1969, the nudity was joined by on-stage self-mutilation, with broken drumstick shards dragged across his chest until blood ran down his torso. At Max's Kansas City in New York in 1973, he fell off a table, landed on broken glass, and rather than stop the bleeding, sprayed it across the front rows. At the Cincinnati Pop Festival in 1970, Iggy produced a jar of peanut butter, smeared it across his chest, and flung chunks into the crowd while a stunned audience watched. He also performed what is widely credited as the first ever stage dive that same day, launching himself off the stage and into a sea of outstretched hands. If you want to know where every shirtless frontman in punk and metal got the idea, the answer is always Iggy Pop. He did it first, he did it harder, and he was willing to bleed for it. Number 9, David Bowie. David Bowie did not show too much skin in the traditional sense. What he showed was too much of something else entirely. Too much gender fluidity, too much androgyny, and too much proof that a man in a bodysuit and platform boots could be the most magnetic performer on the planet. When Bowie debuted the Ziggy Stardust persona in 1972, he wore costumes by Japanese designer Kansai Yamamoto that left almost nothing to the imagination. Skin-tight bodysuits with open legs, dramatic cutouts, and silhouettes designed to blur the line between masculine and feminine. For audiences in the early 70s, this was a man who had publicly declared himself bisexual, wearing costumes that suggested there was very little fabric between his body and the spotlight. Bowie proved that showing too much was not just about skin. It was about challenging every assumption an audience had about what a male pop star was supposed to look like. And every glam, punk, and new wave performer who came after owes a debt to the man in the Yamamoto leotard. If you are enjoying this look back at pop's most daring stage moments, take a second and hit subscribe. We cover the wildest stories in pop music history every week. Now, back to the countdown. Number 8, Wendy O. Williams. If you thought Iggy Pop pushed the limits, Wendy O. Williams made him look like he was performing at a church picnic. As the front woman of the Plasmatics, formed in New York in 1977, Williams performed in outfits that were little more than electrical tape over her chest and shaving cream. She chainsawed guitars in half on stage and blew up amplifiers while wearing almost nothing. In January of 1981, she was arrested on stage in Milwaukee for simulating a sexual act during a performance. Arresting officers reportedly had to tackle her to the ground in front of the audience while she was still covered in shaving cream. She was arrested again that same year in Cleveland on obscenity charges. Both sets of charges were eventually dropped, which only confirmed what Williams had been saying all along. She was later nominated for a Grammy for Best Female Rock Vocal Performance, proving the industry was catching up with what her audiences already knew. Number 7, Cher. Nobody in the history of award shows has ever used fashion as a weapon quite like Cher. Her partnership with Bob Mackie spans decades, but the defining moment is the 1986 Academy Awards. Cher had been passed over for a Best Actress nomination for Mask, despite winning Best Actress at Cannes. She was furious. When invited to present Best Supporting Actor, she asked Mackie to make something unforgettable. He delivered. Cher walked onto the stage in black stretch pants, a bejeweled loincloth, knee-high boots, a chain-link top, and a feathered mohawk headdress 1.5 times taller than her head. Jane Fonda introduced her by saying, "Wait till you see what's gonna come out here." Cher took the microphone, and she said, "As you can see, I did receive my Academy booklet on how to dress like a serious actress." 2 years later, she won the actual Oscar for Moonstruck, wearing another Mackie design. This one was completely sheer, except for a few well-placed sequins. Number 6, Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury approached stage fashion the same way he approached music. More is more, and if more is not enough, add a crown and a royal robe. Throughout the 70s and the 80s, Mercury performed in skin-tight leotards, ballet-inspired unitards, and leather outfits that left little to the imagination. He combined the physicality of a ballet dancer with the showmanship of an opera singer and the attitude of a heavyweight boxer. His most iconic moment came at Live Aid on July 13th, 1985 at Wembley Stadium. While other performers dressed up, Mercury walked out in a simple white tank top, tight jeans, and a studded armband. No elaborate costume, no special effects, just his body, his voice, and 72,000 people in the palm of his hand. The crowd's sing-along during Radio Gaga is still considered one of the greatest live performance moments in music history. When you are Freddie Mercury, a tank top is enough. Number 5, Rod Stewart. There is a reason Rod Stewart's 1978 hit, "Do You Think I'm Sexy," was called that. And there is a reason the answer from stadium audiences was a resounding and slightly confused yes. Stewart embraced a stage wardrobe of leopard print spandex pants, shirts unbuttoned to the navel, and satin trousers so snug that there was not a single secret left for anyone in the first 20 rows. He combined the strut of a peacock with the wardrobe of a man who had declared war on the concept of loose-fitting clothing. What made Stewart different was that he did not seem to be making any artistic statement. He was just a guy who sincerely believed he looked fantastic in leopard print spandex. And the worst part was that he was probably right. Number 4. David Lee Roth. If Rod Stewart believed he looked good in spandex, David Lee Roth believed he looked good in everything, including nothing. As the frontman of Van Halen through their commercial peak in the early 1980s, Roth turned the stage into his personal runway. Assless chaps, skin-tight jumpsuits unzipped to the navel, bandanas, boots, and an amount of exposed chest hair that could have its own zip code. He performed jumping splits in outfits held together by nothing more than confidence. Roth once told an interviewer that he spent more time choosing his stage outfit than rehearsing the set list, and honestly, that tracks. Every Van Halen performance was a fashion show, where the designer's primary inspiration appeared to be, what if a bullfighter raided a biker's closet and lost half the clothing on the way to the arena? Number 3. Grace Jones. Grace Jones did not just show too much on stage. She turned her entire body into the performance and dared anyone to have a problem with it. The Jamaican-born model, singer, and actress became one of the most visually striking performers of the early 80s, with her flat-top haircut, angular features, and an androgynous physicality that terrified and fascinated audiences in equal measure. Her 1982 concert film, One Man Show, is a masterclass in using the human body as art. She performed in body paint, in barely there costumes, and occasionally in nothing at all. What set Jones apart was the aggression. She was not coy, not teasing, she was confrontational. Her performances felt like a dare, and if you looked away, you were the one who lost. Andy Warhol painted her. Keith Haring body painted her for a live performance. She was too much for mainstream radio, too intimidating for variety shows, and absolutely perfect for an era rewriting the rules about what a performer could look like on stage. Number 2. Prince. On September 5th, 1991, host Arsenio Hall told the MTV Video Music Awards audience, "This is the one. This is the reason I took the gig again." He was introducing Prince performing Get Off. The stage looked like a scene from the fall of Rome, pillars of fire, semi-naked dancers everywhere, and in the center was Prince wearing a yellow lace bodysuit designed by costume designer Stacia Lang. 3 minutes in, Prince turned his back to the camera and 80 million viewers realized the bodysuit had no back. The entire rear panel was made of illusion netting, which is a polite way of saying you could see everything. Stacia Lang later explained that she used a thin fabric called marquisette to suggest exposed skin, and the yellow French lace was specially dyed to that bright citron shade. But from a television camera's perspective, the nuance was lost. The audience saw what they saw. The Los Angeles Times called it an all-out simulated orgy, adding that Prince's performance was the kind of fleshy spectacle that sends writers running to their dictionaries. Prince had been releasing family-friendly material for a few years, and this was his reminder to the world of exactly who he was. The man who wrote Darling Nikki, the man who put a parental advisory label on an entire generation, had not gone soft. He had just been waiting for the right stage and the right shade of yellow. And number 1, Madonna, September 14th, 1984. The first ever MTV Video Music Awards took place at Radio City Music Hall in New York. The network was still figuring out what it wanted to be. The hosts were Dan Aykroyd and Bette Midler. ZZ Top was the headliner. The network had signed a deal to air the show on local stations, based on the promise it would be a relatively harmless evening. Then, a 26-year-old singer emerged from the top of a 17-foot wedding cake, wearing a white bustier, a wedding dress, lace gloves, and a belt buckle that read, "Boy Toy." She was performing like a virgin from an album that had not even been released yet. As she descended, one of her stilettos slipped off. She later said she thought she would just pretend she meant to do it, so she dove to the floor and rolled around. The dress hiked up. The underpants became visible. And instead of cutting away, the production crew zoomed in. Her handlers backstage were convinced she had gone too far. One executive later admitted the network was holding its breath, convinced this would be the end of the Video Music Awards before they had even finished the first one. When it was over, the camera cut to Bette Midler. She said, "Well, now that the burning question of Madonna's virginity has been answered, the performance was supposed to be a disaster. Instead, it made Madonna an instant superstar. Like a Virgin became her first #1 album and the first by a female artist to sell over 5 million copies in the United States." MTV executive Les Garland said simply, "She stole the show." The Video Music Awards became the most unpredictable awards show in television. By the following year, Eddie Murphy was hosting, and every major artist in the industry was fighting for a performance slot. And for the next 4 decades, every performer who wanted their own unforgettable Video Music Awards moment has been measured against those 3 minutes in 1984 when a woman in a wedding dress rolled around on the floor of Radio City Music Hall and changed pop music forever. Every performer on this list understood something the censors never figured out. In pop music, there is no such thing as showing too much. There is only showing the world something it was not ready for.